You shall celebrate a sacred occasion on the first day, and a sacred occasion on the seventh day. No work shall be done on them, only if you can prepare food, blah, blah, blah. You shall eat the festival feast unleavened bread for the very day, and blah, blah. And this shall be throughout the ages an institution for all time. Okay, unleavened bread makes a little bit of sense because they're about to march into the wilderness, and unleavened bread just simply lasts longer than leavened bread. Bread without yeast is what we'd probably call crackers, and crackers might last 2 or 3 weeks, whereas bread might last 2 or 3 days, unless it's there's some German breads that last more than a week. But most bread isn't very good for after the first few days. Verse 22, take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and the 2 doorposts. None of you shall go outside the door of his house until morning. For when the Lord goes through to smite the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the lintel and the 2 doorposts, and the Lord will pass over the door and not let the destroyer enter and smite your home. The destroyer, of course, was not God. God doesn't come down to kill Egyptians. I mean, why would any God think that a bunch of slaves of the Egyptians are more sacred, more chosen than Egyptians? It's completely and utter madness. It's hate. It's mockery. It's a vile lie. And the whole concept of course, was to keep the Egyptians in the house so they wouldn't be seeing what bloody well is going on. And what was going on was probably the soldiers, after they ate the meat, left their houses, their dwellings, and went out a killing. And they killed every firstborn son, including every firstborn of the cattle and all the livestock, which were already dead anyway, so it's kind of ridiculous, but that's a moot point, because the book is probably fiction. But even if it is fiction, well, some of it's fiction, most of it's fiction, it's still a very hateful and bloody thing against Gentiles in general. Okay, so anyhow, when you enter the land that the Lord will give you, of course the land is already occupied by other people, as he has promised, you shall observe this rite. And when your children ask you, what do you mean by this rite? You shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, because he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt, and he smote the Egyptians, but saved our houses. In verse 29, in the middle of the night the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And the Pharaoh arose in the night with all his courtiers and all the Egyptians, because there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was no house where there was not someone dead. He summons Moses and Aaron in the night and said, up, depart from among my people, you and your Israelites with you. Go worship the Lord as you said. Take all your flocks and your herd as you said, and be gone. And may and this is completely absurd, like the last few verses of Ecclesiastes. And may you bring a blessing upon me also. A blessing upon me also. The Egyptians have just had every firstborn son murdered, and the Pharaoh asked for a blessing? I don't think so. I think this has been written in as mockery, and